Joining us on the Western Hotline to chat a little bit about the Garrett news and mock draft season is pretty much upon us, is a friend of the show, Chris Trapasso, NFL draft analyst for CBS Sports. Chris, good morning.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me. How's it going with you guys?
Good. You flat out went out and put out an offer out there. 2025 first, 2026 first, and Greg Rousseau. Rousseau and 2 firsts. You think that is fair value for Myles Garrett?
I think that it would be probably the best offer that the Browns would get. It's kind of funny that right when the news came out, there were, and I'm sure you guys saw it too, and I'm sure most of your listeners saw it, there were so many different suggestions for, it's going to cost 3 firsts. No, it's not. And if you ask Browns fans, they want, an insane trade package to get him. I think if the Bills offer that, they would get Myles Garrett. Now, maybe it won't even cost that much. The main reason, and I also tweeted this yesterday, I don't think that, given that Rousseau is up for a new deal probably this year, entering his 5th-year option year, I don't think the Bills are going to pay him $25 million and then pay Myles Garrett $35 million and have 2, defensive ends that together combine for a $60 million average per year hit over the course of their deals. So to me, I think they would have to make a decision. Do they want Greg Rousseau at a lesser amount of money, and he's a lesser player, but he's younger, keep the picks? Or you get Myles Garrett and you get 3 years of defensive player of the year type ability, because we have not seen Myles Garrett fall off. I don't think there's necessarily a right and wrong answer, but I think, to me, that is the question that the Bills have to ask themselves and then ultimately answer before they decide what they're going to do, if they're going to even call the Browns about Myles Garrett.
Chris, the loss to the Chiefs is still fresh, obviously. In previous years, they lost to the Chiefs, and they went after defensive end, right? They did it in the draft with Rousseau. They did it in free agency with Vaughn. Is it chasing your tail, or I don't know what I'm looking for here? Should they chase defensive end again when it comes to trying to find a way to get by the Chiefs?
Well, what's the interesting wrinkle in this is that it is an awesome edge rusher class, and in that 2021 class when they picked Rousseau, there was a bunch of edge rushers that went late in the first round. It kind of feels like, this is kind of contingent upon the combine, but that's where a lot of these really good edge rushers will ultimately go after, Abdul Carter is going to go in the first 3 to 5 selections. That's the other question. Does Brandon Beane say, hey, look, I've been chasing these veterans, and Sean McDermott's defense is, of course, like most defenses, at its best when they're getting home with 4. They don't have to do a bunch of exotic blitzes. They can create so much confusion in the secondary when they're dropping 6 and 7 guys. Do they continue that same route and get Myles Garrett, or do they say, we're going to bank on a young player? Now, I don't know what Brandon Beane would be thinking is if he says, well, okay, we kind of hit on Rousseau, but we missed on Basham. We pretty much missed on A.J. Epinesa, never really amounted to a great player as a second-round pick. Is he going to say, we don't have a great system in place to draft edge rushers, or do they believe that they can do that? That, to me, is just from the draft perspective, makes this more interesting, where if this was a edge rusher group that was like, man, there's just really no one, you got to wait until the 3rd or 4th round to get good value. That's not the case in this 2025 draft class.
Do you have a line in the sand? Like, is there a number or a price, I should say, that the Browns would want where you'd say, okay, now, like, no matter how good he is, that's too much for me?
Well, I think it's my offer that I put out there. Like, that would be the line in the sand, in that when I tweeted it, it's like, being a Bills guy, it's like if I put out anything on Twitter or have a suggestion, it's like, how about A.J. Epinesa and a second? Like, then it looks like I'm trying to get the Bills. So I was like, hey, this is about as hefty of an offer as I would go if I was Brandon Beane. With Rousseau, again, then you don't have to pay him, obviously. You allocate all those dollars to Myles Garrett. What I do think, again, it all ties into the draft because it's all related in the offseason, the Bills having those 2 second-round picks, that one selection that they got for the Stephon Diggs trade, I think kind of looms large. To have it's like at 56 and 62 or something like that. I think that ultimately helps, too, and it maybe would lessen the blow of, oh, man, we don't have a first-round pick this year. So what I put out there, Rousseau, and the next 2 firsts, would be probably the top that I would do if I were the Bills. And we may see that it ultimately might not be that expensive, because I wonder how much Myles Garrett, being a legend of that franchise, can go to their GM, Andrew Berry, and say, all right, what have you gotten? Like, send me to Washington, send me to Buffalo, send me wherever to a team that he really wants to go to. We saw in his memo that he put out there that he wants to go and try to win the Super Bowl. So maybe he's ultimately the one that says, I mean, obviously Andrew Berry will make the decision, but Garrett can say, all right, just take that deal, please. Like, I'm asking you to do me a solid here after all I've done for this kind of bumbling franchise the last 7 or 8 years.
Chris Trapasso on the Western Hotline chatting on the Myles Garrett stuff. How about Rouso as a player, Chris? Is it a no-brainer to extend him and give him $20, $25 million?
I thought that was the case, that he would be in that range of like, all right, he's not going to reset the market. He's not going to get close to like Nick Bosa and ultimately what Myles Garrett and Michael Parsons are going to get. But with Rouso, and tell me if you guys feel the same, it's like you look at the PFF numbers, you watch the film, and you go, okay, yeah, he had a good game. He had 8 pressures against the Jets. He had 6 pressures and a couple stops near the line of scrimmage against the Titans. But in those big games, I think the fact that Brandon Beane had continued to be big game hunting for that edge rusher who's going to win really quickly around the corner, it's like Rouso doesn't show up in those games. So I think that lowers his value a little, and it makes it more of a question where maybe the Bills don't just say, hey, we're not going to offer you anything, but it's closer to $20 million than it is $25 million. And I think that's the weird and kind of fascinating part with Rouso, that he's like the most uniquely built edge rusher in the NFL, that he's like almost 6'8" and like 255, 260. He can win. He's gotten stronger. He's not a bad player by any stretch. He was probably the Bills' most consistent 3-down defensive lineman this season. But are his wins happening at a Von Miller pace? Like, are they happening in under 2 seconds? Not usually. He's not that type of player. He wasn't that type of player at Miami. The Bills have developed him well, but this finished product, now 4 years into his career, I don't know if he's worth $25, $26, $27, $28 million with a new second deal.
I wonder too, like if he wasn't included, maybe Cleveland says, but we'll see what they would want. And would they want Rousseau and to pay him, or would they want more draft pick, whatever? Like, I was looking this morning, Chris, at like how often guys get double teams. And by the way, Garrett is like the best in the league when he's being double teamed by far. Like the chart I'm looking at right now, he's just completely off in his own quadrant. And there's Rousseau right in the middle. Like, maybe because he's not a superstar, this doesn't get mentioned as much, but the Bills don't really have a stud on the other side. A lot of times it's Epinesa. Mm-hmm. Like, Rousseau gets double-teamed a third of the time. Like, that's not a bad number. So you would hope, I guess, that if the Bills could land Garrett or whoever it was on the other side, that fewer double teams would mean better results from Greg Rousseau.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is not like, by no means am I giving any inside info that I think that they're going to offer Rousseau. I just thought that if you wanted to lessen the blow of how many draft picks you were going to send, you could send Rousseau, because it's, again, they have to make that decision. What are they doing with him? And he's still young. He could be a valuable asset for a team like the Browns that's clearly rebuilding again. But yeah, I mean, certainly with Myles Garrett, he would draw all the attention, and there would be a ripple effect across the entire Bills defensive line. And like I said, Rousseau is not going to just win with speed and bend around the corner in under 2.5 seconds. He's going to win with power and a nice counter move because he's long, but it's going to take a little bit longer. So to get in more legit one-on-one situations where when he uses that swim move to the inside, there's not the right guard there that's there to kind of chip him back to the right tackle. So it's something that why I think this is not one of those, hey, every time that there's a player on the trade market, we think the Bills should go after them, or fans do. And we've seen Beane be aggressive. I think it's different because of Beane's history, him saying we've been chasing this guy that's a finisher. And I think Sean McDermott could be in that room saying, look, like when we were in Carolina in 20 and 21, early in the Sean McDermott era, when the defense was at its best and was an elite level defense, they were getting home with 4, and they were always one of the lowest blitz rate teams in football. And we've seen when they've had to dial up the blitzes against the better quarterbacks in the playoffs, or the big regular season performances outside of a few when they're playing a good quarterback, that's when the Bills defense has not played up to par, or has played, frankly, pretty badly. So I could see Sean McDermott saying, yeah, get me a Miles Garrett type, because then we can do so many other confusing things for the quarterback in the secondary.
Chris Trapasso on the Western Hotline on Bills offseason targets. Of course, Garrett, the biggest one. Chris, do you have any other names that, I don't know, you like, whether it's free agency or a perfect draft fit? I know this class is said to be pretty good for defensive line, edge, and tackle, and I think the Bills would probably like to do some work there.
Yeah, so I haven't looked a ton into the free agent class. I've kind of been full bore going ahead with scouting reports and evaluations for the draft. Obviously, free agency comes first. I'll certainly peek at that. But to me, what I think is interesting, and Jeremy, I'm normally with you blowing the wide receiver train horn every year. I didn't love Keon Coleman. I wanted to add McConkey last season or Brian Thomas. Bills didn't get either. What I think is interesting this year, though, like you're saying, a perfect draft scenario, I mentioned it's a great edge rusher class. It's also a really good defensive tackle class. So what I would almost say is, for as much as I certainly would not be upset if the Bills picked a wide receiver at pick 30 this year, it almost aligns where the first two picks, or in the first two rounds, they obviously have 3 picks in those first 2 rounds, would be on defense, and I think the odds are that's what they would probably do anyway. And it aligns where the wide receiver class, after, Travis Hunter, Ted McMillan from Arizona, as I'm digging into this wide receiver class, I like some 3rd and 4th round guys who I think can be good players. Jack Besh from TCU is a really fun name who had a great Senior Bowl. Ricky White from UNLV is kind of like a Tank Dell, Deontay Johnson who can get open. Jalen Royals from Utah State is kind of a Debo Samuel, DJ Moore. So, in almost thinking of where the Bills are likely to pick a wide receiver,
you like
when
the
they
value.
go on the clock, I like the value with either that second pick in round 2 or maybe even in the 4th round.
All right. Chris Trapasso on the Worcester Hotline. Thanks, Chris. We'll chat again in the future very soon, I'm sure.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot.
All right. Chris Trapasso, you can follow him on Twitter at Chris Trapasso. Does great work for CBS Sports. And, we talk every couple weeks.